Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
This is an odd chapter title, and it's not really the only odd thing we're going to encounter when it comes to words.
Odd, as in, would it be a queer?
Strange, bizarre, unexpectedly out of the ordinary. So, welcome to episode 129 of Exploring Tolkien. We're on episode 18 of Going Through the Hobbit. This week, we're looking at the first part of chapter 7, Queer Lodgings. Sorry, was that too long of a pause? And we're going to talk about furriers too. So we've got it all this episode.
Nice.
We've got it all. Hey, sorry about missing last week. Life has been very alarmingly busy for both Michael and I, particularly with, we had the fires in Southern California. We've got familial things, we've got work, and like I said, this is not a day job. This is a labor of love for both of us. And so for the foreseeable future, for a while, we're going to be doing one episode every other week for now. That doesn't mean we might have an episode here and there. That's, if there's news that comes out or something interesting we want to talk about and put that out. But so expect one every other week for a bit moving forward. So I apologize for that, but right now that's going to be the best way we can give it the most attention it deserves. Otherwise, we're just going to be sleeping through podcasts, and that's not a good thing.
The good news is all our listeners know we cover Tolkien slowly and carefully. So
what's 50% slower? Who cares? Okay. Speaking of percentages, I could to bring up this unique thing. So our Rings of Power episodes, clearly most people love to hate watch, and so we've gotten over 1 million views on all of our Rings of Power episodes. Which, for somebody who does YouTube on the side and doesn't really make any money from it, it's fine. It's good that people like to hate watch it, but not that many people watch it anymore. Season 2 of the Rings of Power lost 60% of the viewership from season 1. Wow.
And remember, only 37% of the people that started season 1 finished that.
That's right.
So,
wow. So, for instance, if we were to, let me get the right image up here. So, if we were to look at this here, this shows that the Rings of Power season 1 had nearly 8 billion minute views, right? How many minutes were watched of the show? Season 2 had just over 3 billion. So it dropped 60+% essentially from their original numbers. It was down.
This is season 1 to season 2. Right?
Season 1 to season 2 dropped 60%. So only 3 billion minutes. I mean, that's nowhere near the top 10 of anything when it comes to minutes viewed. And that's right. The viewership, they say, here's the thing they say the viewership had, I think, 55 million people engaged with Rings of Power after season 1. Something along those lines. Or once season 2, right here it is. Over 55 million people at this point have engaged since season 2 launched. What does engaged mean? I don't. Does it mean they visited the page on Amazon? Yeah, does it mean they?
This is one of these corporate weasel words from Hollywood that just means anything that they can claim, like somebody clicked on it at some point, and they can claim engagement. So it has no. Interestingly, or not so, rather, what I meant to say is tellingly, they won't tell us how much of the audience stuck around from the beginning of season 2 to the end of season 2.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. They just told us the total minutes. I mean, it could have been like 2 billion minutes for the first 2 episodes, and then everybody just dropped off the last 7, 6, however many, 8 episodes. Is that right? So I don't know. I just thought I'd have to bring that up. Like, much as I enjoy the times we get to review it, I don't enjoy the times that I have to prepare for talking about it to actually create those episodes. So I'm hoping they shut it down. They have said, so the showrunners JD Payne and Patrick McKay have said, yeah, we're doing season 3. We're hard at work. We're gonna do it. But Amazon has not officially announced season 3 is on the way. We're working, right? We're planning. The sets are being built, right? Nothing has been done, and it's now been 3+ months since it ended in October.
So it says now. How does that work? Because it says the Rings of Power season 3 has been greenlit. What do they mean by that?
Greenlit. This is, as far as I know, all they have said is they said we're prepping now very, very intensely. This is the showrunners have said we're prepping now very, very intensely and promise the upcoming season would be awesome, right? So I don't. This is the thing. Like it's been said by the people involved in it, but the corporation has not gone out and said we're going to do it. Here's what I'm guessing is they're saying like, go out and create something amazing for season 3 or changes will happen. I bet if they do anything, they will try to draw back on the money spent on the show and point out you lost 60% of your people, you're losing more than 60% of your budget. So I'm sure something like that is in the cards for how Amazon will approach season 3. But there's been no announcement like, look at season 3, it's on the way, as they did with season 2 when season 1 ended. So,
right.
Anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up. Sorry, everybody. Not to. I don't want to bring up bad memories or file in your mouth when we're talking about the seasons of Rings of Power. But there you have it.
Well, Rings of Power is a travesty. I mean, as we've said so many times, but in different ways. But it has no soul. It's a corporate effort to try to make money off of a beloved IP. And today we're going to get to cover some of the text of the early work that made it beloved, so that at some point later, one of the largest corporations in the world could make a zombie out of it and try to make money off of it. But which is what Rings of Power essentially is. It's just all these shows. They're all zombies of Lord of the Rings. I mean, not the Peter Jackson movies. I exempt from that. They are not. They're a great effort and largely successful.
But everything that's come out since The Return of the King has been a corporate directive, not a personal project.
Yep.
And that's the biggest difference,
including the Hobbit movies themselves, which were were 1/3 Peter Jackson and 2/3 zombie. So
yeah. I mean, he had a vision for the Lord of the Rings. He just never extended it into the Hobbit. He didn't want to do the Hobbit. In any case, guys. Yeah, so well, any news that comes out, we'll always be around. We'll still be doing episodes for that sort of stuff, whether it's just me or me and Michael, or they're trying to find one other person that maybe like when there's quick news. I know because our schedules are very different, Michael and mine, and since I do the technical side of it, sometimes it's easier to grab somebody else if we're talking about something, and I'm sure Michael won't take it personally.
Yes, it's what I do in life. Do what you're good at. I'm really good at taking everything personally.
Okay.
Super personal.
Dang
I'll lose a lot of sleep.
All right.
Or maybe.
Well, the good thing is I lack an empathy gene, so I just don't care. So go ahead and lose a lot of sleep.
This is why we get along.
That's right.
Two hosts, no empathy.
This is why the extended podcast is something you should listen to, because we kind of let our hair down there. So if you want that, become a member at thewondering.com/member. You get the extended podcast. You get our Discord chat. I believe we're doing our next real live in-person chat on February 20th. I got to look at my schedule here. Pretty sure it's February 20th. Yeah. No. February 17th, I think. I'll have to double check that, but yeah, we're going to do that. So we all get together in a Zoom call. We chat. We talk about things that are on our minds when it comes to Tolkien and how much we love Tolkien and how much we hate other things in life too. So
what day of the week is that?
It's a Monday. Mondays have turned out to be the best day for most people. So Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern, and in our Discord chat, we will post the link to that chat. I'm trying to figure out a way to easily get it to everybody else. And maybe I'll have to try to set up a separate newsletter, because there are a bunch of people who aren't in our Discord who would probably like to join at some point too and hear us talk about the things that we're afraid to talk about in real life. Real life, I mean real podcast. So,
usually while enjoying a cigar.
Yes, yeah, if it's warm enough. And it's 60 degrees now, which is about 53 degrees warmer than it was a week ago here. So I'm more than willing to do it when it's that warm, but when it was 7 degrees, I couldn't do it outside. So yeah, go to thewondering.com/member, get the extended podcast and all the goodies that come with that. Okay, let us jump into What is this? Episode 18? Yeah, episode 18, where we talk about queer lodgings. But before we do that, we have
Hobbit Facts.
Did you know that
Hobbit.
when The Hobbit was published, his publisher asked him, hey, can you do something like a little bit of a drawing, maybe something like that? Because he knew Tolkien was a little bit of an artist. So Tolkien came up with this, which is The Hill, Hobbiton Across the Water. So it was a frontispiece for the first printing of The Hobbit, right? The frontispiece is the piece that's on the opposite side of the title page. So you open up the book, you get to the title page, and this is on the opposite side. And then they said, this did really well. So could you, Mr. Tolkien, could you take this and make it in color now that we have money? Because they didn't want to do it in color before. They had to do it in black and white like this. Any gradients, you can see it's like no gradients here. It's all just black and white. So what Tolkien did is he took the book, he actually traced it, and then he put it in color, which was this. So this is his colored version of The Hill, Hobbit.
And that is my earliest memory of The Hobbit, because that was what was on the book The Hobbit that I read when I was first a kid.
Yeah, this should be front and center in every version of The Hobbit, because this is Tolkien's vision of the Shire. This is what he imagined. And much as we say subcreation is cool and it's really good for us, it's really neat to see what Tolkien created in his own mind right here. And to have this, I think, is great. And I think this is he didn't do many like first drafts and then second drafts, but in this one he did. And there are some subtle changes here and there, but not really many at all. He just added a bunch of flair, a bunch of like the style to it, and it feels like a British town to me when you look at this colored version of this. If you're listening to this, I'll put the links below to these images in the show notes, so you can click on those as we're talking about this.
It might even feel like a little bit like a British Shire.
Oh, indeed. Or a lot like a British Shire. So there you go. That's our Hobbit fact, that the first vision, really, and this is the first vision of Middle-earth in The Hobbit, right? This is like the Lord of the Rings vision of Middle-earth.
This is great, and it's a perfect springboard into my commentary, which we'll give after we give our plot summary. But my first comment about this chapter starts there in that picture, because it's Bilbo waking up from that odd dream, which Jonathan and I both concluded was a kind of ring dream.
It was either rings, or he was looking for warm toast in the morning. It was one of those two. It was either food or the ring, but
two things can be true at once. So
probably the
dreams, as it turns out, can have more than one impetus and more than one meaning. So he wakes up as first thing in this chapter, queer lodgings. He wakes up, and the first thing he thinks about, of course, is toast and bacon. And his
can I just say,
warm bath.
Yeah, as you go over the can you do the you want to do the plot summary again? Every time that there's a simile or a metaphor here, I would just, how many times is it about food? Like, I just realized now, rereading this, I wish I would have thought of this in the beginning and recognized this, and I would have read it, and I would have been like, okay, there's a check mark, here's another food, this is when Bilbo thinks about food. And it's multiple times in this chapter, again, that he thinks about food. So,
well, in this chapter, and Bjorn's home is rife with references to food, and in fact, it's Bjorn himself is kind of like the interesting frosting on the cake of the meal. Of course, cake being a culinary example itself, but yeah, you can't escape food. That's the lesson for today, children. You cannot escape the food. All right. So, queer lodgings, at least the first half of the chapter we are going to cover, is the plot summary of this one is actually fairly simple. Bilbo wakes up in the Eagle's Eyrie with the rest of the dwarves, and he wakes up wishing, ready to go put the kettle on, as it says. But lo and behold, he's at the top of a mountain, so that ain't going to work. So he has cold meat for breakfast, and then says their goodbyes. Well, actually, just gets a ride on the eagle. This time on the top of the eagle, instead of being carried by its claws, he gets to ride in the top. And goes. He and the dwarves are taken by the eagles all the way down the Misty Mountains, out into the lands between the Misty Mountains and Mirkwood. and to a huge rock pillar in the middle of the river called the Carrock, apparently. And there they are dropped off by the eagles. They say their goodbyes. We learn a little bit about eagle etiquette. And Gandalf and the dwarves and the hobbits set off after Gandalf tells them that he is not going to be with them anymore. He's planning on leaving, and the dwarves go through, well, we'll talk about what they say, which I found hilarious. And they travel then on, and Gandalf tells them a little bit about someone's house he's heading to, a capital S somebody. And on they go until they reach the house. Precautions are made where the Gandalf wants them to come in first, just himself and Bilbo, and then following that, dwarves at 5-minute intervals, 2 of them each, excepting Bomber, who's going to come last because he counts as 2, because Tolkien's still telling fat jokes, which he does a couple times. So they go and they travel in, and it describes Beorn's house, which is this incredibly rural setting, but sort of a homestead, has got a homestead feel to it, with pasture and orchards and
giant
massive
bees,
and animals of a variety of sorts. All of them, apparently, there's a wood somewhere that leads to Narnia, because they're talking animals, according to Gandalf. We haven't heard them talk yet, but there's that connection, or at least I that's one of those things where, aside from the eagles themselves, very few animals, and the occasional thoughts of a fox, very few animals in Lord of the Rings talk, but in The Hobbit, quite a few animals talk, and these are some of them. So we get this Gandalf telling their tale to Beorn, and at intervals in the tale bringing in more and more dwarves via commentary, his commentary, and Beorn, who's very I felt some sort of kinship as a bit of a grammar Nazi myself.
I thought you were going to say it's the large beard, but go on.
I don't have a large beard. I doubt
significant beard.
I doubt Beorn's beard is as trim as this.
True.
I imagine more of a mountain man beard, but since he is a skin changer, part bear, some of the time anyway, and so he's very swift to catch word usage. Apparently, everyone in Middle Earth is a philologist, and they love words. Like at one point, Bilbo finds himself sitting down staring at the flowers and wondering if he knows the names of all the flowers that Beorn has in his house, or right outside his house. And so anyway, Beorn pays attention to words too, and he gathers that there are more and more. Their party is larger than Gandalf originally led on, and it slowly grows until finally all of the dwarves are in. And the reason it grows, of course, and Gandalf has to do it this way, is because of all creatures of goodwill in Middle Earth, we have found the one creature of goodwill that has a faster and fiercer temper than Gandalf. Gandalf is usually the gold standard for a bad for quick-tempered in Tolkien.
Good man with a bad temper, yeah.
Right, but Beorn, Gandalf even comments on how quick he is to anger, and that's coming from Gandalf, which is saying something. So finally, but with the quality of the tale, Beorn is impressed and interested, and doesn't begrudge them a meal.
Yeah.
So that's the end.
Yeah, it's we'll get into Beorn, but it was funny how, like, when you go back to the first time you read this, you realize, like, either he's really Gandalf what's the word I'm looking for? Gandalf overpromised how the danger of Beorn, or Beorn is clearly loves a good story, and I think it's more the latter than the former. Yeah. So, but let's start back with the beginning, where Bilbo wakes up, and like you said, he has the vision that he's still at home. Like, after however many months he's been on the road now, according to, it would be a long period of time, many weeks he's been on the road. The first thing he thinks about when he wakes up is still to go put his kettle on, and then he realizes he's not at home. And I think it's a way of saying, it's like, look, that bag inside is still there driving Bilbo forward.
And there will always be, throughout this
Yes.
book, it will always be the war between the Baggins and the Took. And we see the Baggins side. And that was what my commentary about his painting, it's one of the really cool things about hobbits. These creatures that are so endearing to us that Tolkien has created, that without which, I mean, there are plenty of tales, of fairy tales, which from different people, Tolkien himself even, where this quality of civilization and home and the endearing love of a well-tended garden and this sort of the pastoral life is not as strong. But for Tolkien, this is a genius mark of hobbits, and is their deep love for the good things of the earth and civilization. Things like a warm bath and tea, putting the kettle on.
Yeah.
So for Tolkien, he excels at both the wild adventure and the new lands and the crazy creatures, but he also excels at showing us the comforts and the depth of the peace of home and what effects it has on our hearts. And this is why we love the hobbits.
Yeah, and I think it's a direct, like, this. It's what Tolkien wanted to be too. He remember the Misty Mountains, that whole that whole piece of the lightning and thunder and the storm that came down hard with the stone giants in the Misty Mountains was a direct experience he had in Switzerland in the Alps.
Right.
And but he loved it, right? He loved that experience. It was essentially life-changing for him, but he wanted still the comforts of home, and so it was who he was. It reminds me of the famous quote he has, I think, in I don't remember where it's from exactly, but he said, "I have an unsatisfied desire to shoot well with a bow." And it's sort of like, I think all men do who can't shoot bows very well. We all have an unsatisfied desire to shoot well with a bow. But that's what a hobbit is. A hobbit is like that part of us that like loves the comforts of home, but longs for adventure. And I think that's why we identify with it so much. If Tolkien identified it, we identify with it. And yeah, when I'm away and camping, like the first thing is like, where can I get my coffee in the morning in order to feel
exactly. Even when I'm out and I've got a big day in the mountains planned with the kids, and you get up in the morning, you still want the fire and the coffee to start you out.
That's right.
And then you can go forth and adventure, which right. The world would be a poorer place without the adventure. And it's really interesting. You mentioned the archery thing and the adventure and that contrast, because we see that even not just in Bilbo's reaction when he wakes up, but in the first scene when the eagle's flying him down. So now instead of being held in his talons or hanging on to a dwarf, even scarier, he gets to ride on the eagle's back. And he's perfectly safe in the feathers, and he has an experience which, if in today's world of where flying has become a little commonplace for people in developed nations, this is not as big of a deal. But there's this universal love of the desire to fly, which seems fairly universal across human culture. People love it, but Tolkien's gives us Bilbo, who has the opposite desire. He takes one peep out, and then he covers his face the whole ride down. And the eagle said, "What could be better than this?" And his first reaction to what could be better than this is a warm bath and late breakfast on the lawn afterwards. So that's better than flying from for the first time, or not the first time in your life, but the first general moment of your life. You get to fly and look in safety down upon a world for the first time, and he doesn't care. That's not what he wants. He wants a warm bath, and he wants a breakfast on his lawn.
Sleep in, enjoy the ministrations of warm, bubbly, salty bath.
Exactly. And
then make breakfast whenever you want to. That's like true vacation right there. But for Hobbit, that's just Tuesday.
Yep.
So they drop him off at the Carrock, and I mentioned it last week, thinking like the Carrock, like I misspoke and said the Carrock was where the eagles took them. No, that was their eyrie. But now they try to take them to the Carrock, which is, like you said, is this large rock in the middle of a river with stairs leading down that have clearly been hewn into that. And the eagles bid farewell, and Gandalf knows the exact phrase to say, the correct reply, as if it's just second nature to most people, but Gandalf at least was there ready for it. But you should have known this if you would have paid attention in second grade. The correct reply is, "May the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks." It's clearly they have a good relationship, and he's had to use that before.
Well, and also I think it's supposed to it's meant to tell us that the eagles, you know, if you're a race of creatures that's truly intelligent and civilized, then you have things like courtesy and greetings and things like that. So
some of the time, though, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Some of the time, because they'll still take the sheep of the men that live near their borders.
Eagles got to eat, so you know.
It's funny because the eagles and the wargs are. Like we talked about a little bit about this last week. They're civilized. Let's talk about the eagles. They're civilized in that way, right? They have a pecking order. That doesn't sound right for the eagles, but hey, right? They've got the Lord of the Eagles, and then they've got the people below him. They've got the way that they eat. They know that it's good to like bring the food for their guests, but yet they go in and they just sometimes don't care. If it doesn't affect them, how much do they really care about it? They'll steal the sheep, even though they won't kill the people, but they do have a moral code where they don't like the goblins, so at least they'll get rid of them just because they dislike them. So it's this sort of, they're an interesting, they're not men, right? They're clearly not like, they're not just anthropomorphized birds. They are a different cultural creation that Tolkien made.
Right. Right. They are a whole different kind of rational animal.
Yes. Yeah. Rational animal. Right. Yeah. Yeah. They're not rational humans. They're rational animals. And they still have that little bit of that animalistic side. Okay. Anyway. Okay. So Carrock. So I decided to do a little dive into the word Carrock.
Cool.
Because in reading the history of the Hobbit, the writer, the author, boy, why I don't remember his name right now. In any case,
keep going. I'll look it up.
The author. It's a large book. It's like 1,000 pages. I don't read his
Douglas
his name
A. Anderson.
Douglas Anderson. All right. So this is what he wrote about the word Carrock. So where does the word Carrock come from? Because what Tolkien writes about the word Carrock is he just says it's his word for it. It's a Carrock because he calls it a Carrock, and that's what it is. But that's not really true, because Tolkien actually...
The he being Beorn, by the way.
He being Beorn, yes, correct.
He's explaining to the dwarves and Bilbo why it's called it.
So Tolkien, who wrote a book called the English Dialect Dictionary, and he lists that word in it where it's pronounced Carrock, like K-E-R-E-K, Carrock. And it's defined the word. So this is a dialect dictionary. This is not like the official language. This is not a dictionary like the Oxford English Dictionary. This is a dialect dictionary, how people would have said things or pronounced things in different regions through their different dialects. And so a carrock is a cairn, a heap of stones used as a boundary mark, a burial place, or a guide for travelers. And it can be defined as a distant mountain by which the sun appears over it for country folk to tell the time of day. So it's sort of both, this Carrock that he has. It is a boundary marker, right? Because it's like they dropped him off there, and that's where the eagles are like, we're not going any further. This is our boundary marker right here. But it's large enough that it's not just a heap of stones or a small marker in the middle of a large field. Is actually larger, and they actually have to walk down it, and there's some significance to it. And in fact, what's really interesting is if you move on to this, you can find that I looked up where else does Tolkien use the word Carrock? Well, originally in his outlines to the chapter Farewell to Lorien in Middle-earth, in The Lord of the Rings, in the Fellowship of the Rings, Tol Brandir, which is that large rock that sticks up out of the Anduin right before the Falls of Rauros, R-A-U-R-O-S, Rauros, where Bilbo and the Fellowship part ways, Bilbo and Sam and the Fellowship part ways, and he crosses the river to go into the Emyn Muil, and they go, and Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli go to pursue Merry and Pippin. That was originally called Tol Brandir. That large rock in the middle of the Anduin was called Tolondren the Great Carrock. So even there, he had the word Carrock. And you think of what's that other he loves rocks in the middle of rivers. There's that one in the first age in Beleriand where Sauron's tower is, or it's taken over. I can't remember it too. Anyway, that's also essentially a Carrock. Let me find that real fast. It's funny because I'll remember these things, but I don't remember all the names all the time. So we're going to see if I can find it here.
Which and as you're looking it up, I'll just point out or reinforce what we might have mentioned briefly a little earlier, which was that classic Tolkien, that the conversations that they're having while they're walking are about the meaning of words. So there's a big conversation about why it's called Carrock.
Tolsirian, I believe that's what it's called. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. So there's I just think like Tolkien was like, yeah, maybe I won't say where the word Carrock comes from and just say it's his word. Although it's sort of like he has this thing about Bjorn. Bjorn is somebody who just does things his way, and who are we to question it when he does things his way?
That's a good way to put it.
So, for instance, he says so they get into a discussion about this. I'm going to jump into Bjorn before. Do we need to where Gandalf describes Beorn? Is it Bjorn or Beorn? I volley between the two of those.
I would go with Beorn probably. I know I said Bjorn, but because
it's so easy, right?
but actually Bjorn is probably closer, right? Because there's a character, speaking of Douglas Anderson, his book gave a great analysis based on Tom Shippey's analysis that the character in there's a character in the saga of Hrolf Kraki, this Norwegian, I actually don't know which culture it's from specifically, but Norwegian lay that is cursed. The character Bothvar Bjarki, his father Bjorn. That's it. That's Bjorn, Bjorn. So is cursed to be a bear half the time, and so his name probably would have been spelled Bjorn and pronounced.
That's true.
So that's why I say Bjorn.
That makes sense. Bjorn instead of Beorn.
But it is quite possible, too, being Tolkien, that he changed the pronunciation of it, and it's supposed to be pronounced Beorn. So I'm not, because he didn't want to copy too closely, but maybe he didn't care. He often doesn't care about copying. He's shameless about that, and he has no need to feel shame, because when you're creating myth, there's no reason to not copy if you feel it's the best. And I think the reason I asked like Bjorn BJ is Bjorn, but Beowulf BEO like BEO Beorn. You don't say Beowulf, you say Beowulf, and so there's that. So let's go with what you like, Beorn. But you're right. You were saying that he's a very unique character, and his outlook on everything is his own.
Yeah. He says he is under no enchantment but his own. Right. Which is a little bit hard to read in the sense, like, what does that mean? Like, that enchantment, like, does that enchantment mean that the enchantment that he becomes a bear is his own enchantment? It's kind of a unique wordplay on that. And in reading the history of the Hobbit again, he makes a point that Tolkien wasn't completely convinced that being under an enchantment it was his own in the way that he started it. So in his plot notes, we saw that Tolkien does state that the bear should be enchanted, and so he wrote this here in the history of the Hobbit. Let the bear be enchanted. Tolkien underlines the point for emphasis, and he didn't forget this motif of enchantment later in the book, with when he mentioned that in the Battle of the there will be the Battle of the Five Armies and the disenchantment of Beorn. So he originally thought he was enchanted by something, and maybe at the Battle of the Five Armies by defeating the orcs, that enchantment would be gone. Because remember, he was a man who was driven out of the mountains. That's why he hates the goblins. So I'm sure that Tolkien originally thought, well, the reason he would turn into a bear was some enchantment was put upon him, like being a werewolf in a sense. At night he might turn into a bear or something, which is what we see we'll talk about it in the next episode. But the enchantment, now Tolkien decided, no, the enchantment is his own. We're not going to make the bear thing a negative thing that was put on him by some sort of, the great goblin did something to him and now he turns into a bear at night. But he changed it. It feels like he changed Beorn as he discovered the story as he was writing it.
Right. And he clearly is, so clearly that Gandalf says it directly. He's under no enchantment but his own. But that seems to imply there is an enchantment of his own.
Yes.
And so of his own making or of his own nature, we're not sure. Or maybe of his own in the place that he dwells. Who knows? Tolkien isn't more clear, but that's okay. I particularly liked, and I did pay attention to it, I hadn't noticed it before this reading of The Hobbit. When Gandalf is talking about his history, he says, some say that he is a bear descended from the great and ancient bears of the mountains that lived there before the giants came. Again, the giants keep popping up.
Yeah.
So that, at this point in the story, Tolkien is still fine with referencing giants all over the place. He even calls the Carrock, it looks like it was a stone thrown there by a giant among giants. But back to Beorn. Others say that he is a man descended from the first men who lived before Smaug or the other dragons came to this part of the world and before the goblins came into the hills out of the north. I cannot say, though I fancy the last is the true tale. So what's fascinating to me is that Tolkien is establishing priority here, and all of the strange creatures, the monsters, came into this part of the world at some point. The giants came, the dragons came, the goblins came. They weren't originally here, but what was originally here? Bears and men. So he's like he's like an original man. He's like an atom of some kind, or he's the
struggler of the Edain that came through. Is it the Edain? Right? No, that's not.
Edain. Sorry.
Edain. Sorry. Yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. Those are the original guys. The
bears and the men.
Bears and the men.
they were the ones there first.
So wasn't there the whole discussion about bears and men that came out on the internet like a few months back?
Yes, there was some discussion like that.
There's some validity to the whole discussion, I guess.
It turns out that whatever your answer was, that you would rather be alone with in the woods at night, Beorn fulfills both roles. That's right. Doesn't matter what your answer.
The ultimate.
You're stuck there with Beorn.
Beorn, a furrier.
Ooh.
So let's get into that word a little bit, because I loved, I always thought, why is this so funny? What furrier? And this was before we had, sorry guys, the idea of furries. I'm not going to get into that. However, Gandalf calls him a skin changer, and then Bilbo says, "What? A furrier? A man that calls rabbits conies when he doesn't turn their skins into squirrels?" And so this, I was like, why? I don't understand. Why is that interesting or funny? I get that he thinks he's like I always thought maybe he's like a taxidermist. That was the first thing that popped in my head when I read it. But I'm like, no. He's like a furrier means like a skin trader, like somebody who goes out and kills animals and takes off their skins. And this is great, because in the history of the Hobbit, he makes this point. I don't know if you caught this, but he wrote this: Bilbo is thinking of a rustic trapper or poacher. His comment about turning their skins, and originally it was Arctic fox, not squirrels, in the first draft. So his comment about turning their skins into Arctic fox probably contains not so much a view of the innate crookedness of fur traders as a deliberate echo by Tolkien of Elizabethan slang, the dialect again, where coney catching meant a con game or a swindle, the guileless victim being the rabbit, or coney to the commons weasel or fox. So so it's actually a play on words here of it being like a swindling people. Like he's making this comment that Beorn is swindling people, or he's a con man, and that's when Gandalf does say, "Good gracious heavens, no." And I'm like, oh, that's why he's so upset about it, because it's sort of like a dig at Beorn by calling him a furrier, a man who turns skins into squirrels. So yeah,
I love that line by Gandalf too. The four nose, each of them getting larger and larger. No,
Yeah.
no, 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 said Gandalf.
Yeah.
Don't be a fool, Mr. Baggins, if you can help it. And in the name of all wonder, don't mention the word furrier again as long as you are within 100 miles of his house, nor rug, cape, tippet, muff, nor any other such unfortunate word. He's a skin changer. And he changes his skin. Sometimes he is a huge black bear. Sometimes he's a great, strong, black-haired man with huge arms and a great beard, which is why this doesn't cut it. This is not a great beard. So
and it's no longer completely black, I'm sorry to say.
Yes, yeah, I know. It's the longer it gets, the whiter it gets. So there's that.
It's more distinguished. It's okay.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's what I tell myself. But I also like in this conversation with Gandalf and the dwarves, the previous paragraph or two paragraphs where Gandalf doesn't want to say who it is at first that he's taking them to. He just says somebody, capital, a very great person. You almost be very polite when I introduce you. And then he says, he gets angry easily. And by the way, this is Gandalf saying he gets angry easily. And the dwarves then gather around and say, is that the person you are taking us to now? Couldn't you find someone a bit more easy-tempered? Hadn't you better explain it all a bit clearer? And so on. And this I like because Gandalf's reaction to, couldn't you explain it a bit clearer? He says, no, I could not. And I was explaining very carefully, answered the wizard crossly. So I love, first of all, the first thing that happens is Gandalf gets mad after telling them how easy it is to get Beorn mad. And so he gets mad. And second of all, it reminds me of Gandalf even from Lord of the Rings. Like Gandalf's personality is the same because they ask him, shouldn't you explain it a little more clearly? And his answer is, no, I could not. I was explaining very carefully. And it reminded me of Gandalf's, one of Gandalf's most famous lines in Lord of the Rings, which I'm going to paraphrase because I didn't pull it up, but it was, and I can, he's talking about the why the ring came to Bilbo in the first place. And he says, I can explain it no more plainly than this, that Bilbo was meant to find the ring. And that is a very comforting thought, to which my reaction has always been, really?
Is it that comforting?
Explain it no more plainly than that? It's really easy to explain it more plainly than that. The maker of the earth, Iluvatar, intended Bilbo to find the ring. That's what you meant. But the fact that Gandalf can explain it, I can say it no more plainly than this. Yeah, you can. It's just Gandalf is almost inveterately obscure. He cannot help himself but be obscure.
He's not detail oriented when it comes to his answers. Like you think of him on the horse, right? To others,
in his own mind.
Sure.
But does not like explaining.
Like, he's not going to explain to Palantir. He's not going to explain on the horse to Minas Tirith, right? He gets he gets out of sorts pretty quick. He's so yeah. So let's move forward because we'll be here forever on this. And we have more to talk about Beorn next week too.
How about when Gandalf introduces himself to Beorn?
Yeah.
First mention of Radagast, right?
Oh, yes, right. So, okay. So Radagast, it's really interesting. So I made a couple notes about Radagast here. And the one thing it seems to me is that he's his cousin. That's interesting. Okay.
But there are different meanings of the word cousin. So
I know. And you could say they're all children. They're Maiar, direct children of Iluvatar in a way. So yeah, they could be cousins. I mean, although I think at that point, that's not what was going through his head. But Tolkien meant for Radagast, and reading like the original draft, that he was supposed to have a bigger part in The Hobbit, and I thought that was really interesting. But we just don't know. So and in the Lord of the Rings, right? So in one of Tolkien's original plot notes, written in August of 1939, he was saying that on a fresh start for the new Hobbit, as he called it at the time, he was actually including Radagast as one of the listed items of plot elements he wanted to bring into it. So I think he had more, like he wanted to do more with Radagast, but he never came into the story as he was writing it, right? Because Tolkien's writing is an exercise in discovery. It's in discovering the plot and the characters that come along. And since Radagast never really made it into the plot again, he wasn't there anymore. But he liked Radagast, I think. He just never had the opportunity to bring him in.
Which totally makes sense, because Radagast, of all the wizards, Radagast is the one closest to Tolkien's heart in a way. I mean, maybe you can make a case for Gandalf, but
put the vision of Radagast in Peter Jackson's Hobbit out of your head completely, please.
yeah, no bird crap in this.
No bird
this
crap
picture
or
allowed.
cross-eyed or
So stupid.
taking a puff of some weed, whatever that was. Like, yeah.
But Radagast is the wizard of nature. I mean, this is Tolkien, right? We have this whole, for example, this whole chapter is full of the a man, a lord of his little region. There's a lot to be in common that Beorn has in common with Tom Bombadil. The part that is played here, where there's a house of refuge that the hobbits go to in the house of Tom Bombadil in the Lord of the Rings, and then here they're both masters of their area in a way. Obviously, Tom Bombadil's way more of a master than Beorn is, but Beorn has his own enchantment, and there's magic about his house, and the food is wonderful, the hospitality is amazing. It's like this little island of civilization in the midst of the wilds, in both places. But Radagast is a wizard after Tolkien's own heart, in a way. I mean, Tolkien, this is the man that invented a whole race of talking trees, for heaven's sake. And I mean, his love of nature and the wild is legendary. Tolkien's is, and so Radagast would seem to be like the more natural wizard for him to include as a main character, and yet Gandalf is clearly the main character wizard. And so it's fascinating. Like you said, I think it does boil down to the way Tolkien subcreated, which is he discovered, where his mind just sort of led him to the story. His imagination took hold, his creativity working within, and he didn't even plan things so much as just discover them. And in the discovery, the wizard that we think might have been closest to Tolkien's heart was not the one that was the main character, which is kind of cool. I mean, I think I find it pretty awesome and fascinating in terms of an exercise of imagination.
Yeah, it's interesting. He calls him his good cousin. Now, you spent time. Is that because there would be bad cousins? Like, was he thinking greater, or is it just a?
That's a polite. That's a way of mannerism where you say my good cousin, my good friend, my.
Just making sure.
The good man, the good brother, the good, because that's a medieval thing too.
Right, because Beorn's response is, yes, not a bad fellow as wizards go. So he does say he approves of him as good in a way. His response.
And frankly, I love Beorn's attitude. Like, he's always making commentary, and he's clearly, like, Gandalf is shown to, by the narrator to be basically the most powerful, competent character we meet through most of the book. Single character, and yet Beorn has a rather dim opinion of wizards in general. There's one point at which he says, "So there is some good being a wizard then." Yeah. when Gandalf mentions that he kills a couple goblins, but Beorn is clearly has his own, as you said earlier, unique take on everything, and he doesn't like dwarves, for example, and he doesn't afraid. He isn't big on courtesy. He just speaks his mind. So the first time a dwarf appears with, I think it's Thorin and Dori, right? Who I'm becoming more and more convinced is actually like the most important dwarf besides Thorin of the lot, because he keeps showing up doing all these things, and I've totally forgotten how many things Dori takes.
Yeah, he almost lost his legs carrying Bilbo to the Eyrie, right? So.
he has plenty of dialogue and his own personality, and anyway, besides Thorin, he shows up with Thorin. So,
and I like, right, like, nobody has a good relationship with the dwarves in Tolkien stories, right? It's sort of true. Like, the goblins obviously don't like him. The elves aren't fond of them. Even Bilbo's, he's put off by them, and even Beorn, the oldest man who was in the mountains before anyone else came, he's not overly fond of them.
Exactly. That's a really good point. And I'll say that there is one moment in which we get a hint as to maybe why that is, like, where Tolkien reinforces why that is. The character of dwarves in The Hobbit is rather mean and low. Mm-hmm. I don't mean mean as in cruel. I just mean mean as in not noble.
Yes.
So this is the part where Gandalf is telling them, by the way, I was planning on leaving you before this point, so I'm going to leave you soon. and they're all in dismay. And Bilbo's answer is just to cry, which is hilariously Hobbit-like. But the dwarves, what they do, it says they begged him not to leave them. They offered him dragon gold and silver and jewels, but he would not change his mind. We shall see, he said. And I think I've earned already some of your dragon gold when you got it. Yeah. So, but it's hilarious if you think about it, right? What does this tell you? This tells you the dwarves had never thought that they were going to give
him gold
anything anyway. He was like, he's managing their entire expedition, saving their lives, taking them. They thought he was going to accompany them all the way to Erebor, and they had never planned to give him anything in the first place. Like that's just these creatures are so petty. It's insane.
Well, you think like in the way that they attacked Doriath and carried off all the gold right there, that's all they wanted. They wanted just the silver and the jewels. So by that saying that to them, by them saying that to Gandalf, they're essentially saying, this is the dearest thing to our hearts, and we're ready to part with it for you to stay with us. And so it's a term of its affection that they're showing by offering him the gold at this point. Although he did have the map, and they should have given him something at least for that.
Well, they should have given him something for a lot of things that Gandalf did. But the fact that they didn't even plan to do that until all of a sudden he was about to leave, and then they just remind me of the petty dwarves like Mim from
they do seem more like that, don't they? Yeah, for sure. I agree.
Not quite the level of Mim, but
they at least probably won't betray you completely.
Right.
But they might.
Right. So then there's the long story encompassing about 4 pages or 3 to 4 pages of Gandalf retelling what we already know, but in a slow way, where he gets to reintroduce more and more dwarves, and they keep showing up, sometimes on cue, sometimes before cue, sometimes a little after cue. But
every time Beorn's like, all right, fine, sit down. I want to hear more of the story.
Right. So he really enjoys the story aspect. And so, Gandalf has told us, by the way, before we ever got to Beorn's house, that it would be a bad idea for them to wait for Beorn to find them, essentially. He says, you don't want somebody to find you. That would be a very dangerous thing indeed. So here's a man, a skin changer, who clearly, if he had found them by the Carrock, without any greeting or anything, might have killed them. At least it's implied. And here not only welcomes them into his house, but offers them a meal and is pleased, all because in return for a story. Which is food and story, as it turns out, are given high regard in this chapter, and gold not so much, because gold is refused and has no hold on Gandalf, but stories have hold on Beorn, and food has hold on everybody. So it's an interesting chapter. I really like it.
Well, it makes me think about so tying this together, stories and Beorn's Hall. So Beorn's Hall is essentially Beowulf's Hall, and it's so let me bring up actually here, if you're watching, I'll try and put this link also in the show notes, but that's the hall right there. That's what Tolkien drew as Beorn's Hall, which is as Davidson, the author of the History of the Hobbit, put it, is essentially Heorot, the Grendel haunted seat of old King Hrothgar, right? He modeled after this, and he was incredibly familiar with it. And so this is almost like a direct representation of what we would have seen in there. And who were some of the most respected people in Norse? It was the storytellers, it was the bards, it was the poets, right? This is where we get the Old English half line that ultimately is from these stories back then. And those are what kept the Mead Hall enchanted in a way, right? This is what kept the warriors in their place, were these stories. And so having Beowulf being completely enthralled by this, I think, is a callback to the Norse mythologies of Beowulf and Grendel and the stories that were told there in the Mead Halls there.
Good point.
Yeah. So, I just love this vision, like the vision that Tolkien had of his world. It just brings it to life so much, and it makes, honestly, looking at this Mead Hall, and then I look at what Jackson did with that, I'm like, not right, close-ish, but that felt more like a Northern California cabin than this Mead Hall. And so, yeah, I love it here. I'm going to read the way Tolkien describes the Mead Hall to us with this picture up. And if you want to bring it up, if you're listening to it, you can click the link in the show notes. They passed here they go. Sorry, I started too soon. Following him, Beorn, they found themselves in a wide hall with a fireplace in the middle. Though it was summer, there was a wood fire burning, and the smoke was rising to the blackened rafters in search of the way out through an opening in the roof. By the way, I just found out recently that when you leave smoke in the rafters and it coats it with soot, that is essentially a way of preserving the wood. It makes it rot less and it preserves the wood. So this is why one reason why you'd have it in the middle of a hall. The hall would actually stand longer and last longer. They passed through the dim hall, lit only by the fire and the hole above it, and came through another smaller door into a sort of veranda propped on wooden posts made of single tree trunks. It faced south, and it was still warm and filled with the light of the westering sun, which slanted into it. So at this point, like they're outside. They're on a veranda. Right. But yeah, so this meat hall, and we'll get into it next week. I just love the vision of that lit only by the fire and the hole above it. It came through to coat the rafters in this black soot. Although here you don't really have it as sooty. Yeah, so we'll get more into that whole hall aspect of it next week. I'll probably bring up the picture again. The visual again, to me, Middle Earth, the greatest character in all of Tolkien's stories is Middle Earth, and the way that he builds it, and to have his vision of it is still wonderful to me. Right. So all the dwarves are there, and the last thing he says to them is like we were talking about, a very good tale, the best I've heard for a long while. If all beggars could tell such a good one, that they might find me kinder. So Gandalf knew exactly what to do with Beorn.
Which is hilarious because it shows that Beorn himself has enough self-awareness to know what his own reputation is about hospitality. Like he's and of course he's making excuses for his lack of hospitality, but his normal lack of hospitality. But
and I love that he says, "You may be making it all up, of course, but you deserve a supper for the story all the same. So whether true or not, just the value of the story is good enough. Let's have something to eat." It comes back to food. Bilbo's going to be happy. And yes, please, they all said together, "Thank you very much." And that's where we're going to end it this week. It's such an interesting, like, we didn't spend very much time on the way that he brings them all in. But the first time I read that, it was very funny to me. It was this sort of like, oh. But reading it through this time, you realize why. Before I thought like he's just kind of pulling the wool over Beorn's eyes, but Beorn, he loves the story. He's a very Norse kind of character who loves these stories and who values that above much else. It is the it's the IMAX theater to us is the story to him, and he can be completely engrossed by it and not care that these dwarves, who he's not overly fond of, still come into his house. The value of the story supersedes his personal thoughts, his personal feelings about the dwarves, and then brings them dinner. And we'll talk about all that next week. Any final thoughts that you have before we get into our extended edition?
Before the extended edition and discussion there, no, not as much. No, I'll leave with this one final thought. Mm-hmm. This is one of the things that I'm sure most fans of Tolkien have a number of examples of this in Tolkien's world, which, be fun. So if our listeners who actually made it this far in our podcast want to tell us in the comments, it'd be fun to see. It'd be fun to hear which kind of thing that you guys is the thing that you wish Tolkien had written more about. But I always found that I wished he had written more about Beorn and the Skin Changers. That would be there would be some pretty awesome tales in Tolkien, in the imagination of Tolkien. I'd imagine, and Beorn is such a cool character that. He has his own personality, and it's just a great. I would have loved to have heard more about him and his people and his descendants in the time of the War of the Ring. And so that's the thought I'll leave with, is that the stories, just like Beorn, the stories themselves are of immense value. They're the thing that are perhaps the most valuable. That's why we do what we do here, because the value of story. So
yeah. But the value of story isn't free. So if you want to become a member, go to theorg.com/member. We're going to get into our extended edition, and you can ask questions about this when we meet on. I think it's February 17th. We'll have another episode out before then, so we'll put it in for sure. It's 1 month is free, so you can just become a member and then cancel if you just want to chat. But we're going to talk about we're going to talk about the Eagles again. We got some interesting comments from folks on YouTube and folks in Discord regarding the Eagles. So we're going to talk about Eagles again. Also, I want to bring up, I've been reading a book called Bandersnatch, which is about the Inklings. I think I might have brought it up last week. I can't remember. But it occurred to me reading this, right? The best work of these authors came out while they were as part of the Inklings. And so we're going to talk about why that is and what our thoughts regarding that and where that brings us today in our modern culture. So become a member, $4 a month. First month is free at theonering.com/member or theonering.com/Patreon. Catch you later, everybody.
All right, freeloaders, go find some good stories.